What's up, guys? It's Dave from UltraMegaDeathRay.com here to give you another video interview. This time I had the pleasure to speak with David Mullich, who is this longtime game developer. He's been making games ever since the beginning of the industry, more or less, in the late 70s. And he is most well known for creating the 1980 Apple II classic, The Prisoner. Yeah, it was a lot of fun to get a chance to talk with him and ask him a bunch of questions. So enjoy. Your first game with Edgeware was The Prisoner. Like that's the game that you've been most known for. Was like what was like your thought process when developing the game, like aside from it being like related to the '60s TV show?
Well, I was a huge fan of the original show
Hmm.
when I went to college because it was playing on our local PBS station at the time, and the themes that it presented about being an individual, fighting against social conventions, fighting against authority was very appealing to being a college age student.
Yeah.
So to mirror some of that in a game. And so when Edgeware hired me right after I left college, I was fortunate in a position where I could suggest some of the games I wanted to do because while I was going to college, I did a number of games as a freelancer for them. They brought me on mostly to do educational software because the company was Edgeware.
Edgeware, yeah.
Right. So, but we also published games. The Edgeware's tagline or motto was unique software for the unique mind. So in addition to doing the educational software that the owner of the company really wanted to do, we also did what we consider to be intellectually stimulating games. And they knew that to keep me happy, they had to allow me to do games, so they let me suggest my own game ideas. So I told them that I was a huge fan of this television series, The Prisoner, and I really wanted to do a game based upon it. And the owner of the company, he wasn't a fan of the show. He watched a couple episodes. It was really completely beyond him. But he was willing to indulge me. And so I set about to create this game. Now back then, we were very naive. I mean, I was a kid fresh out of college. I didn't know anything about copyright or trademark or intellectual properties or anything like that. And conversely, corporate America, or in this case, corporate Great Britain, was fully aware of what was happening in the game industry because it was still very much a hobbyist industry back then. So we could get away with a lot because no one was paying attention to us. So we never actually got a license for the TV show to do it. So I knew I didn't want to rip them off precisely because at least at the time, I had some awareness of copyrights. Later on, especially when we did a sequel to The Prisoner, I insisted that we get the rights to it. And what they actually did, the marketing person called up the BBC or whoever it was who had ITC, I think it was, who owned the rights to The Prisoner, and basically said, do you mind if we do a prisoner-themed restaurant?
Really?
Any issue with that? And they said, no, just go ahead. You don't need any kind of agreement. So they thought, as a result, it gave them the rights to do a game called The Prisoner. You can't get away with that today.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah, we got away with it back then. Some of the themes I wanted to mirror from the show were that you were fighting against, you were trying to maintain yourself being an individual despite all the forces getting you to conform and therefore being controlled. So there was a little bit of social commentary in the game. So there were mini games within it dealing with religion and with education and business. And so to be successful in those mini games, you were put in situations where the goal was to kind of fight against what you were being told to do.
Right.
So it was a game about breaking the rules.
Fight the power, basically.
Yeah. But also, even at that time, even though it was in the early years of gaming, things had kind of started to settle down into very concrete genres with their own rules. So there was your platform action games, and there were the text-based adventures, and so on. And each of those had very, very similar game mechanics throughout different games. Well, I wanted to do something that kind of broke all those rules. And one thing that was very common in adventure games was having a text parser, where you would type in what you wanted to do. So if you wanted to go north, you type in go north. If you wanted to turn left, you type in turn left. If you wanted to pick up the rock, you would say get rock.
Right.
Everything was verb action. Well, that I found very constraining. So I created a text parser that was much more fluid and was much more forgiving. So instead of saying get rock, you could type in go over there and pick up the rock and take it with you.
Okay.
Now, in truth, it would just identify get rock in that sentence, but it would allow you to type in other things. So it came across as being more complex than it was. Another thing from the show that I wanted to emulate was that at the end of every episode, no matter what number 6 tried to do escape, he'd always wind back at square one.
Yeah.
At the end of the show, he'd always be returned back to the village, and the bars would slam on his face in the closing credits. Well, I wanted to do that too, so that in all your mini adventures back in the game, you would be sent back to number 1, square one, which was your address, number 1 Island Square. So you'd get that sent back, and then you'd have to go through a maze to leave your house and walk to the rest of the village. But the maze was randomly generated. So what I was trying to do was both kind of maintain that frustration from the TV series that no matter what you did, you weren't making any progress. But as a game, you need to feel a sense of progress in order to keep playing it. You have to give some
incentive to keep moving forward.
Sense of achievement.
Yeah.
It's sort of like, and so that's what it was. I did little things in it, both in terms of variety and little things of progress. Well, some inventory items you could acquire and all that. So although in many ways you didn't seem to be getting any place and any closer to winning the game, you still had little bits of achievement, and it was playing the concept of intermittent reinforcement is more powerful than constant reinforcement. As long as I could occasionally give little bits of sense of achievement, a little sense of progress, that actually proved to be creating a very addictive experience.
There's like a lot of psychology at work, like when you're thinking about like the player experience and like how they're going to go about your game and what will keep them playing until the end, basically.
Yeah. So I was actually, it was interesting. I was both trying to break the rules that I saw in games of that time, and I wound up creating brand new game mechanics that eventually I saw appearing in other games. A lot of people were fans of The Prisoner, but it was kind of a cult hit, not as opposed to a mainstream hit. Unfortunately, I don't think it was very influential. I don't think it influenced many game designers. And whatever I came up with that I saw in later games, I think is more coincidental rather than actually inspiring many people. Because the game itself was just so bizarre. I don't think anyone tried to really replicate it.
Do you believe that like the themes presented in The Prisoner today, could make for like an interesting like current or next gen title now?
Oh, absolutely. The main themes of trying to be an individual in a society where there are a lot of forces trying to get you to conform, whereas also kind of protecting yourself from giving in and giving up your values is as relevant today as it was back then in the 60s when the show came out, and in the 80s when I was doing it. Just maybe our values and our interests are a little bit different. Nowadays with social media, our big concern is how do we maintain our privacy in a world where we give up we give up so much of ourselves. We reveal so much of ourselves through social media. Plus, with webcams everywhere and traffic cams and all that, there's so many people watching us and recording us, and just people with their own iPhones and with cameras built in and all that. Our images are captured all the time. How do we participate in society without giving up too much of ourselves, so much of ourselves that other people can control us? These days, there are certain values that are promoted throughout popular media, throughout the internet, that you're also expected to value, or you're considered not hip, or not with it, or not politically correct.
Social conforms, yeah.
So there is pressures to conform now, but it's a different value set. Mm-hmm. So that would be an interesting theme to explore. And in fact, there was the Prisoner TV show was actually resurrected a couple of years ago.
Oh.
AMC came up with a miniseries starring Jim Caviezel and Ian McKellen. And while that was in production, actually AMC contacted me about doing a new version of The Prisoner to help promote that show. And unfortunately, our talks didn't get very far for whatever reason, so I never wound up making a new version of The Prisoner. Mm-hmm. That's probably just as well, because the show itself wasn't that big a hit, the miniseries. But it did actually it did try to update the themes, and it did try to present, it did address the themes of privacy and such in the here in the 21st century. Even though the miniseries wasn't that successful, I think the theme and the whole idea could be more successfully executed, both in terms of a show and in terms of a game. I'd love to do a new version of The Prisoner, if only I could get someone willing to fund it.
I mean, those
had a lot more freedom back then than I do nowadays.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I mean, those themes that you brought up, they seem to kind of fit the mold of the upcoming Ubisoft game, Watch Dogs. I'm not sure if you've been following that at all, but
I've not closely. I'm aware of it, but not the details.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of having cameras always watching you, and people being controlled by their their smartphones or whatever, you being always being watched without realizing that they might be in that more of a symbolic kind of prison in that way. I feel like that game's gonna kind of touch on those themes, just
nice.
Like how you did in The Prisoner back then.
Nice.
There was another game that you worked on back in the 80s called Wilderness: A Survival Adventure.
Oh yes.
Which introduced the first person viewpoint that's popular today, and also included gameplay elements such as a hunger meter or a crafting system. Is it surreal for you to see that still be an integral part for a lot of modern games today? For example, the crafting system in The Last of Us.
It doesn't strike me now the way it struck me back then, because when Wilderness came out, I was a producer on the project. It was actually developed by two NASA JPL scientists, Wes Huntress and Charlie Colhase. I was their producer on the project. I actually did all the artwork that appears in the game, all the wildlife graphics and the shelters and such. And I actually supplied them with the text parser I used in The Prisoner, so that it could be used in the game, so you could type in your commands to construct a tent or fight off the bear or whatever.
Yeah.
And I also wrote a lot of the manual using the game in the classroom. Because it was a game that won awards both as a adventure game and as educational software, because it really did teach you about wilderness survival skills. In fact, we came that close to getting the Boy Scouts of America to accept it for fulfilling one of the requirements for the Wilderness Survival Merit Badge. Pseudo real-time first-person 3D perspective. I don't think it appeared in any other game prior to that. Mm-hmm. There was a sophisticated health simulation in it. Showing that recreated how illnesses and injuries would affect your health over time and the healing process. And then crafting system where you could go in, collect materials, and build objects out of them. Other games adopted those techniques or probably more likely recreated them on their own. Mm-hmm. And they've gotten more and more sophisticated over time. So it's been kind of a gradual thing. It's nothing I look at and go, wow, that's amazing what they did. It was more amazing to me when Wes and Charlie came up with their original game. I thought it was very, very impressive, and it was a game I'm very proud to have been associated with.
During your time with Disney, you came up with you were working on the game Ducktales, The Quest for Gold, which was a game that I personally played a lot as a kid. I have like a lot of fond memories of that back in school, and there was also the Ducktales NES game that came out shortly before that. I believe it might have been like a couple months before, possibly. Was there like a lot of pressure for you when making the Quest for Gold, considering the success of the NES game?
No, actually, there were two very different projects.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, they were the NES game. Disney's role was as a licensor. We didn't develop the game. We didn't publish the game. And my task as a producer on that project was to supply the developers with all the reference artwork they were using for the characters, and supplying them with scripts from the show and anything else they needed to develop it. And then as they were working on the game, they'd come back and deliver to, show us the game in various stages. And I'd look on it to make sure that all the artwork was on model and on spec, and bring it to Disney artists to look at. And actually, there are a lot of little rules you have to follow.
Mm-hmm.
Like one rule I remember was that when you're doing Mickey didn't appear in DuckTales, but when you draw Mickey, when Mickey sits down on a chair, his feet never touch the ground.
Oh yeah,
that's to make him look like a little, to emphasize the smallness.
Uh-huh.
Like when a little kid sits in a chair, their feet don't touch the ground. Same thing is done with Mickey. But I'd make sure that everything was on spec, on model, make sure the quality level was up there, because we didn't want to diminish the brand by having it associated with products that weren't as same perceived quality as the original materials. So that's kind of my role on a project like that. Over on DuckTales: A Quest for Gold, we actually worked. I came up with the initial ideas for the game. Actually, what inspired me for DuckTales: A Quest for Gold was another company called CinemaWare.
Okay.
that was out there. It was developing games that had much more of a cinematic perspective than some of the other games at the time. And the quality of the artwork was much higher, and they conveyed much more of a story than a lot of other games that were similarly action-based. And when I saw the CinemaWare games, I said, this is the type of game Disney should be doing.
Mm-hmm.
So for DuckTales, I wanted to create a CinemaWare-esque game. And so I went out and found a developer who actually had worked for CinemaWare doing some other games, and brought them in and worked with them on the game design closely. And because we had hired the developer to do it, it was my responsibility to work out a budget and the schedule and making sure everything was on track. It was a much closer relationship. We had more creative control. But in terms of gameplay or story, other than it being both games being DuckTales-ish experiences, there was really no. They were treated as completely separate projects.
Okay, probably like because of them like being on like separate platforms and everything. So,
Yeah.
no direct competition.
At the time, it was thought that console-based games much more of a Twitch experience, whereas on PC games a little bit more thoughtful experiences.
Yeah.
So in the PC version, there was a stock market type game, and even though there were several action games, there was a puzzle mini game, and so it was there were a little bit things that were a little bit more brain teaser-ish sort of stuff, and not purely Twitch.
Throughout your career, which gaming platforms do you feel like you have like the most nostalgic love for, basically?
Well, certainly in terms of nostalgia, it's got to be the Apple II, because I created The Prisoner on the Apple II, and a couple of games before that on the Apple II. And then back then, really I had so much more freedom than I do now,
mm-hmm.
because I could, all by myself. I could do design, programming, and artwork for the game, and I had a very, very good relationship with my first publisher, Edgeware, so they gave me a lot of freedom, and they gave me a lot of encouragement and support in doing games based upon my own ideas, and then afterwards my own company, Electric Transit, where I did Wilderness. So, yeah, I like that, the control, the freedom. That was very nice. So that's what I liked about that platform now. And actually, the platforms I like now, it's interesting. Back then, things were very, very in the 1980s. There weren't a lot of rules in terms of what you could develop at first, because developers had a lot more control because they weren't relying so much on outside funding. You could develop a lot of games in your spare time. So when you have financial control, you have much more creative control.
Right.
But as games got more and more sophisticated and the hardware got more and more sophisticated, over time you saw bigger and bigger teams where you saw the different development tasks get specialized among different people. So you have programmers, artists, designers, each being separate people, and eventually multiple people, audio people, musicians, voiceover artists, and all that. Teams getting larger and larger, from one-person team to Wilderness being a two-person team. Eventually Games 5-people team. I think Ducktales was probably 7 people.
Yeah.
And then eventually when I was working on Heroes of Might and Magic, that was like a 35-person team.
Just kept getting bigger and bigger.
Bigger and bigger, and the budget's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And whereas my first games, it was just maybe 20, 40 hours out of my time to do one game.
Wow.
Suddenly we have 35 people working for 2 years on a game. You're talking about multi-million-dollar budgets. Mm. So when you have games that big and that many people, somebody's supplying the money to fund that game.
Follow the money.
And the people that supplying the money, they want to make sure they're making a good investment, so they have say-so over what you do. They've got to approve it. Yeah. And so there got to be less freedom, and as more people played games and got out of being more of a hobbyist market games instead of a more mainstream common market, even though more people are playing games, you saw the games establish themselves into even tighter and tighter genres. First-person shooter, real-time strategy game, and some of the
RPGs.
The games, RPGs and such. And some of the games that were done in the early days that were kind of cross-genre or just so unique, like The Prisoner. I couldn't do The Prisoner for anyone during the 90s and the 2000s, because it was just too bizarre. It just didn't fit into any established categories. Yeah. So kind of a lot less freedom, I think, during that period. But now, with the rise of indie development, and indie development came possible because of online gaming. Mm-hmm. And now you don't have to go through publishers to fund your games. To market your games, you can go publish them yourself. You can publish them through Steam. You can create online casual games. There are a variety of outlets for. You can, mobile games you do for the iTunes store. Mm-hmm. There's a lot fewer people you have to get approval from in order to develop your game. Plus, with the scope of a lot of games have decreased, mm-hmm. because you're doing casual games, you're doing mobile games. A lot of platforms allow smaller scale games to be done with smaller development teams. Mm-hmm. And we're getting back to people being able to do games in their spare time. Mm-hmm. So they don't need the funding, they don't need other people's money, and therefore they don't need other people's say-so. Yeah. So now we're getting to a period very similar to what it was like when I first started out. There's a lot more freedom for developers, and potential for a lot more creativity. And for that reason, I'd say if I have a platform of choice now, it's got to be iPhone, iPad, just because of the tremendous freedom the platform affords.
It feels like it's a lot more wide open now. With, I mean, you have like your huge AAA games, like say like the Assassin's Creed franchise. And you might have something small that still looks gorgeous in its own right, like say Dust and Elysium Tale. I don't know if you heard about that, but that was actually all made by one guy. One guy like basically made that game. So it's a funny like situation that we're in right now in the gaming industry.
Yeah, well, it's a chaotic time right now because here's the big breakthrough a couple of years ago was in the social game. Area. Out of nowhere, Zynga rises up to be even bigger than Electronic Arts. But now that market's consolidating a little bit, and Zynga's going through layoffs.
Yeah.
Certainly, all the big publishers are going layoffs as the console market is starting to shrink. As more and more people are playing the online games and playing mobile games.
Free-to-play games, yeah.
And free-to-play games. It's as when new opportunities open up, the established opportunities they start changing. It's not that everything's growing at once. It's just things are shifting around as there are different outlets for games and different methods of making games.
What are your thoughts as far as like where like the gaming industry is like headed now, like in terms of like social media integration or say like with like motion controls or like downloadable content, things like that, like the more modern conventional things of gaming?
Well, it's always hard to predict the future because Yoda says future is always in motion.
Yeah.
All I can do is look at the trends that you mentioned. It's all downloadable content, online gaming, social game, much more social gaming. And much more, virtual reality devices. I used to be a mentor at the USC Game Pipe Lab, helping out the students there with the projects they were developing. And the USC Game Pipe Lab is the number one, the top-rated game development program in the country and probably the world. And if it were a publisher, it'd be the 5th largest game publisher in Los Angeles.
Wow.
So they have teams of students creating projects, and I was at their demo day last month, and I was very impressed with some virtual reality projects that I saw some of the students creating there. I think virtual reality is going to become a bigger element or a viable genre in games coming to the future. I mean,
like with the Oculus Rift, for example.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, everyone's ideal for a game experience, for immersive experience, is a holodeck from Star Trek. That's where we all really want to be, in the future. And the Oculus devices, and other devices, they bring us closer to that experience. It's great to be able, not be constrained by this monitor that you see right here.
Right.
To be able to look all the way around and feel like you really are in the environment.
Like a three-dimensional space. Yeah.
Yes. I mean, hopefully someday you do that without the cumbersome headset.
Right.
Something a little bit, maybe something embedded in a pair of glasses that beams directly in your eyes. So I'm hoping to see a lot more new games out there that are kind of genre breaking or new genres being defined. I'm hopeful that there may be some way that we can get the large scale AAA games like you mentioned Assassin's Creed, which is I love that game. That reminds me of the sort of stuff we were doing back in the Edgeware games days, where we were doing, unique software for the unique mind. We were trying to develop games that had some intellectual meat to it. And I like the Assassin's Creed because of them telling about history as you play the game.
Yeah.
I'd love to see a lot more games come out that create a blend, a much blend of learning and entertainment, so that it's actually seamless to it. Well, something that we're seeing now is games being more accepted in education.
Mm.
Back when I started off, I first started working in the educational software industry, doing both straight on educational products and educational games. It actually is very hard to break into the school market, because back then there were very few computers, and where there were computers, there was a separate room that was a computer lab.
Yeah.
If you were lucky enough to have access to it, the entire, during a class period, the entire class would go over and use the computer lab, or whatever was there, they'd use. Yeah, right. So you did that too. My school didn't have a computer lab. Nowadays, iPad is everywhere.
Yeah.
Every school is getting iPads. All teachers are being handed out iPads. My wife's a teacher, and they just had at the school she teaches at, they just had a meeting just to talk about integration of iPads into the classroom, and every student is going to be getting an iPad. It's a private school.
Wow.
But iPads are coming out everywhere. That allows computing power at everyone's desk, right in front of them all the time.
Mm-hmm.
That makes it much more viable to have educational games, or as the buzzword nowadays is game-based learning, as well as serious games, available to all the students right now, so that you can have entertainment experience merged with classroom experience. Because right now, a big problem that schools have, and probably always have, but even now, so with the world being so fast-paced and so many things attracting students' attention, the big problem is how do you engage students?
Right.
And game developers, game designers, we practice the art of engagement. We developed all these mechanics to increase engagement, getting people to play games for long hours and still keep their attention and wanting to come back for more.
Mm-hmm.
In most games, there is a lot of it is actually quite work. You get grinding in a game like World of Warcraft. You're doing the same repetitive tasks over and over again.
RPGs are like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and to satisfy quests. People that do the serious, in business, in education, now take games more seriously. And when they're dealing with the problems of engaging people in a world where things are fast-paced and everything's occupying the other's attention, they're going back and learning. They're looking at games and realizing what kind of techniques there are for engagement from games that can be applied to in non-game experiences,
right,
like work and like education,
like
and
training.
term for that uses gamification.
Yeah.
So what we're seeing now, more opportunities for game designers and in games, is we're seeing more and more game-like mechanics being applied to real-life situations, and the introduction of games into a broader variety of setting. Games as training tools, games as educational tools. And I think that we're going to see games being brought into much more variety of experiences, and not just strictly seen as entertainment. Mm-hmm. The trick for game designers is going to be, how do you get that right balance between fun gameplay, but also do the training and do the learning that's required, and having it as a blend, the right blend, so you still have that engagement, you still have the fun.
Yeah, it's a balancing act.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's where we're going to see a lot more in the future. We see a broader variety of games and a broader variety of platforms, in a broader variety of places, with a broader variety of intended outcomes and goals, on a broader variety of devices. It's basically games everywhere, every place, for every purpose.
Yeah, I'm sensing a theme.
yeah, without trivializing the experience.
Yeah, since you mentioned the game design merit badge for the Boy Scouts of America, Why do you believe that these skills, for game design, are important for the youth to learn today?
Well, in doing game design, you're called upon to bring forth a number of skills that are actually useful in a variety of areas. Probably the most obvious one is creativity. Developing your creative skills and coming up with new ideas. It's also analytical skills in that to be a good game designer, you need to be aware of what other games and be able to look at other games and understand what about that game works and doesn't work, and how can you apply it to your own creation. So you need to develop the skills of analysis and synthesis in order to be successful at it. A lot of the kids in my workshops, they're probably around junior high school age, and their logic skills, their analysis skills aren't fully developed yet. Mm-hmm. And I found they have very hard time distinguishing between rules and objectives. Mm-hmm. Objectives, what are you trying to achieve? And the rules, what are the steps to take to achieve that? Right. So the experience is helping them develop that part of their minds. And one thing they have to learn, there's a difference between being a game player and being a game designer. Being a game designer, you're not making a game for yourself. You're making a game for other people. And so you have to be able, when you're creating your game, we're teaching it, game design is an iterative process where you come up with your ideas, you develop a prototype of your game, you have other people play it, and you watch their reactions, and then you go back and you make modifications, and then you do it again. And then finally you're supposed to do a survey, get people's reactions to the game, and then do the final reaction to it. So we're teaching it also as a social experience, as well as a leadership experience, because this is a project you're leading in which you have to manage a group of people, the people being your testers for it. Mm-hmm. So we're teaching leadership, we're teaching communications, we're teaching analysis, and we're providing an outlet for creativity. And these are all skills you can apply in a wide variety of experiences.
I notice too, like whenever I go in depth in terms of like looking into like the game development of for like a lot of games today, and like people have to integrate like a lot of their like problem solving skills into that as well. So this seems to be like more of a robust way for kids to do that.
Yeah, it is, and it's doing it in a way that excites them. Mm-hmm. Because they're game players, because they like games, the idea of making their own games is exciting. It's fun to them. They kind of project themselves as a player playing the game when they think about creating a game. Yeah. So it provides that extra bit of motivation and incentive for going through the work that's required in creating a game and in earning the merit badge. It's sort of like the experience, the process of creating a game is sort of a gamification of the work.
If you were to work on a new game today, which genre do you think you would gravitate towards, or at least since I know you don't like to be constricted to conventions, like what kind of genres do you think you would try to integrate together if you were to do like a mixed genre sort of thing?
Yeah, genres I like most are strategy games and simulations. Mm-hmm. I would be if I could do any type of game, it would be, as you probably deduce from the past 10 minutes of me talking, it would be a game where I would be creating some sort of scenario that was both a fun game and where you were learning something about the real world. That's actually the type of games that I was trying to create in the early phases of my career, where I was simulating the oil crisis simulation, and in Prisoner I was simulating some aspects of society and wilderness survival. Mm-hmm. I'd like to get back to that and do that, but obviously with more sophisticated production values, and with over the years hopefully learning more about more sophisticated game mechanics.
Mm-hmm.
It would be nice to come up with a blend of action and strategy in an interesting way. Being able to do a first-person shooter type game that had a lot more intellectual meat to it.
Okay.
That would be fun. But also maybe coming up with something that was just completely off the wall. Just something that was completely different. It'd be fun to do that again. It's just a matter of the inspiration hitting me at the right time and finding someone to fund such an experiment.
Oh yeah, like the gears in motion for it. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, as a result of this talk we're having, now I'm going to start thinking about it. So,
We'll
thank you.
brainstorm that away then.